Sácalo un poquito de ahí. Eso es lo que pasa. Ellos tienen el sonido. Yo, la gente que está escuchando aquí, así que el nivel de este y el nivel de este es diferente. Yo voy a sonar desintonizado. Ahora tengo que yo escuche directamente de la gente. Directo de aquí, al micrófono. Sí, pero mi voz va a estar emitiéndose. Así que yo lo traduzco rápido. Y eso. Se acaba. Grabamos. No te lo dejan en el pero tú no me estás entendiendo. Sí. Porque mira, sí, se va a salir. Va a salir, no a la parte. Porque yo estoy haciendo en vivo sin delay. Y ese va a tener un delay. Así que yo estoy haciendo antes de lo que yo van a ver. Eso va a ser raro. Parece que me ha pasado. Sí. Porque yo me ponía un video. Cuando tú hablas, ese minuto, eso ya sabes. No sabes así. ¿Sabes? Sí, yo lo sé, se tarda. Y yo lo sé también. Yo lo sé porque cuando tuve que trabajar allá adentro, yo traducía y después pasaba tin, y se oía. Eso es. Pero eso es. Eso. Por el delay. Por el delay. Todos los días me tiene que arreglar eso. Pero es que se queda la mata si tú usas el Hangout. Mi voz va a estar exactamente igual que el video, porque eso va junto en un package. El primer día que nosotros hicimos que él no
So you know, each one of you has your microphones at the table. Please make sure we use our mics. Good morning, everyone. My stint is short. I'd like to acknowledge Rivera de la Cruz Commissioner, Ferdinand Ramos Commissioner, Vivian Mateo, and yours truly, Edison Aviles Delis. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of great friends and collaborators. Past presidents of our telecommunications bureau, Council Agaraid, professor, School of Law, good great friend of mine, and other friends that you know who you are. Well, on behalf of the Energy Bureau and the Public Service Commission, welcome to the first workshop amongst many that we've designed to expand on citizen participation in a previous stage of regulation. These workshops are looking for information directly to the regulated. These are sub-occupations and potential solutions in such a way that the Bureau should consider it to include in great part of proposed regulations. As I said, what we're looking for is to expand citizen participation, for which these workshops in no way would they limit the applicable administrative law. We're very pleased to see a full house, and by all means, we have achieved one of the main objectives. There is now participation and the exchange of ideas in common. I trust this to be so. Thus stated, I don't know if any of the commissioners would like to express anything further. I would like to thank the extraordinary effort of our Commissioner Lilian Mateo, who basically has been the lead throughout all of these workshop efforts. So please, let's hear it for the Commissioner, please. In fact, recently, during a regulators conference, was elected Vice President of the United States, which is in 3 years, Puerto Rico will have a president or chairperson at CIROS in the US. So yeah. That's stated. And now, Engineer Camacho, whom I made sure to see that he had a license to practice in Puerto Rico, so I could call him engineer. Thank you. Indeed it is. Edison said, get that license in January. We did. Yeah. Welcome. Welcome. The first thing I want to do is talk about the rules of the event, the game during this event. This event will be run in Spanish. It'll be in Spanish. People who prefer to have interpretation, we have English simulcast translation equipment. I'd like to bring a few issues to the table to see how we proceed. The commissioners are part of our event. Commissioners are here as observers. We're very pleased that the commissioners are playing part of this workshop. We're here to be able to speak openly. One of the things we want to do this morning, we're going to present an introduction, and then we'll open the floor. During that period, we'll be using some modified rules to what you call Chatham rules. The Chatham rules make for people's expressions to be able to, well, express freely. They belong to you and not your organizations unless you say to the contrary. That way we can speak much more freely. At this time, given that at this time I'm unable to take note, we're transmitting and as well recording. That becomes part of our minutes so that we can recur to the minutes and be able to review any of the discussion. What we speak during this workshop and future workshops, what will be left into the record will be part of what will be used to draft the recommendations report that will be shared with the commissioners. So we know that the minutes are being recorded via the filming of the event. The event is also being transmitted live. It's being transmitted live in Spanish, and the commission is arduously working so that this transmission can also be transmitted live in English. There'll be 2 audio tracks, and you can choose whichever one you prefer, English or Spanish. And this is basically what the rules are. I'll give a minute and a half of myself. My name is Jorge Camacho, but I hope that everyone has their ID. Very important. Jorge Camacho, I was born and raised here. I served in Washington's D.C., the Federal Capital's Energy Commission. I was the infrastructure chief there. I'm licensed as an electrical engineer in D.C., Florida, and Edison Mason, and also I've been registered here. I come from Eddie Casiano's regeneration. I played with him basketball. He made a lot of baskets, and I feel. He's going to China, and I'm going to Mil Rivera down the street. So we're very proud of him. That's my generation. I have also served on behalf of Rebrook at the National Electrical Safety Code in its main committee and its underground lines. I'm also working in the 1546 Interconnection panel. That said, yesterday we ran a vote because we know that the 1547 standard was published in 2018, but currently it's still under development as to how the conformity tests are going to be done. And we're also involved in that. Here in Puerto Rico, post Irma, various efforts were made and we're able to work hand in hand with the Electric Power Authority. My experience with Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, has been very positive. There at Monasillos, people are hardworking within their limitations. Salvador at operations, Bermudez, Justo, and others that are very well trained and very hardworking. Now, residentially, I'm also pretty exposed to what happens in various places. For example, Cabo Rojo, where people are going to interconnect, and you go there, and what you see is that sometimes they don't follow the codes at the time according to the National Electrical Code. We have service panels that perhaps are overburdened. Things like that, we're looking, oh, my equipment's falling off. Residentially speaking, all the way up to what's happening at the utility sphere, yeah? Now, let's talk about what our job is. Our job is to be able to identify those areas that they must consider. The areas we will be considering include what standards and technical requisites or requirements must be evaluated so that the interconnection process be such that it provides a certainty to the people of Puerto Rico, that it's clear, and that it can be followed without having to interpret too much. There's various things we have to assess in terms of standards, in terms of engineer certifications that are able to in turn certify smaller systems of certain capacity. And what I'm going to do currently with my introduction is we're going to touch upon the various subjects as an example of the subjects that may be discussed, remembering that you are the drivers of this workshop. This is just food for thought. I'd like to talk a little bit about the agenda so you get a feel about how the workshop is structured. I'll present a brief introduction, as I said, to give us some food for thought as to what we should consider. And after that, we'll open the floor to discussion. Each table has a mic. At that time, we're going to hear what you think, what the challenges have been that you've seen in Puerto Rico, and share them out. That way, we will, in orderly fashion, allow the opportunity for other participants to answer and to expand upon the theme discussion. After that, we have colleagues from the Commissioner's Office that will make lists of the challenges and principles to be discussed so that in the afternoon, we shall then assign groups. So you can then tell us after a term, about an hour and 15, how the various challenges that you've identified can be solved. That'll be in the afternoon. Now, currently, we're transmitting live. In the afternoon, when we do the workshop part, there will still be a transmission, but it won't be as specific as to what each person is talking about. Now, during the work period, if you want to work in Spanish, work in Spanish. If you want to work in English, work in English. However you'd like. In the language of your preference, you work in that language. Now, After the group's participation collaboration will have a break, and then you each shall choose a rapporteur who will set forth and present the recommendations as developed by the group. At which time, we'll see where we're at. Well then, do you have questions or concerns so far? Are we clear? Great. Like I said, this is a presentation as in the capacity of giving us food for thought that's specific to Puerto Rico. We know that there are many organizations talking about interconnections generally. Now, we have some very unique characteristics that are specific to the island of Puerto Rico. So currently, we know we have to consider what are the standards and technical requirements. What do we mean with that? So to say it in, let's say, rice and beans, if you allow me. We would like to ensure that when you interconnect the system to the public network or grid, the conductors won't melt. And that when you connect a system to the public grid, we won't have voltage violations. So the transformers upstream, when they're running upstream towards the transmission system, will be able to work adequately. And we, in turn, what the commission must consider is what standards, and there's many standards and many guidelines or many organizations, but what are those which apply to the island of Puerto Rico and how our grid is configured in Puerto Rico. What is the part of the electric grid that we are to discuss? All this is predicated upon new public policy for Puerto Rico's energy. We know we have some interconnections regulations like 8915 at the authority. 8915 is mostly concentrated in distribution. Currently, regarding what Law 17 stipulates, which is Puerto Rico's energy policy, in this moment, we could also consider parts of the system that may not necessarily be considered distribution. For example, 8915 is right here in this area, you see, which is what we call the primary elements for distribution in Puerto Rico. Here we have up to 13.2 kilovolts. We have quite a few clients who are supplied at 4.16, which is a smaller, lower tier for voltage, which translates into less capacity for interconnection. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because it's very important. Remember, we're now talking about the technical elements so that the system doesn't crash. So currently, we know that 8915 talks up to a megawatt, 1 megawatt, up to that. Now, under the new energy public policy, we can say that interconnection could be up to 5 megawatts. And something that is making the rounds, that if I'm going to have a system up to 5 megawatts, perhaps I'm going to have to connect to the sub-transmission system. But then let's talk about what is currently underway here in Puerto Rico, and is also the case in other jurisdictions. Here in Puerto Rico, there's a conversion program. There's a conversion to 13.2 kilovolts program. Now, if we plan carefully, and that's also how we can plan towards the future, right? If we plan carefully, perhaps during that conversion, those 13.2 kilovolts converters, instead of being 400, maybe we could put them in 600 kc mil or 750 kc mils, so that they have further interconnectivity capacity. Currently, what we can consider, and what is currently in the system, perhaps some 5 megawatts systems will have to be connected to the sub-transmission system. So right now we're looking at distribution, and we can also talk a little bit about sub-transmission. Knowing that in Puerto Rico, we call 38 kilovolts sub-transmission, while other folks, 38 kilovolts is distribution. That's really a semantics issue, but we're concentrating on the technical here, right? So currently, and this is particular to Puerto Rico, this is the line that feeds from Punta Lima to Vieques and Culebra, 38 kilovolts. That's subs transmission towards the islands, municipalities. Perhaps we may consider, and now we're talking about how the law would read for the system to be under what we're considering. And it's also very important to discuss it because this isn't a postcard, folks. This is not a postcard in Spanish. This is our view from Punta Lima, where the cable goes out towards Vieques. It's beautiful, someone says from the audience. So what's important? Interconnection aspects to consider. This is very important because one of the things we're going to do during the workshop is identify the guidelines and principles as to what rules interconnection in Puerto Rico. What are those guiding principles? So these guiding principles must consider greatly the areas for safety and system dependability. If we interconnect equipment to the grid that may be the highest end technology, they may do compensation in the distribution system, and we can create islands and compensation becomes automatic, and we can increase capacity. If we're interconnected, that's great. But if those equipment cause harm to safety and dependability of the system, then we need to rethink them. Yeah. Now, what we have to consider here is what are the aspects of interconnection that are priority, without taking away from functionalities that these equipment that are already out of the market may add to our electric distribution system, the public grid. Now, we know that we do have standards that are highly, let's say they have, let's call them very strict in terms of the anti-island functioning. Currently, there are certain standards that are relaxing a little bit more that mandate, because if the public grid crashes, let's read the prior standard. The prior standard for anti-island stated that when the grid crashes, you have to disconnect. So the new standards, for example, I was looking yesterday, these equipments now, when the grid suffers a frequency deviation or voltage deviation, the equipment doesn't knock itself out immediately. It actually tries to mitigate that deviation. And that's a service, right? Now, we have to think that by providing such service, will the equipment harm safety and dependability of the grid? Now, the guiding principles, things we have to think about, and I need information from the group, but the guiding principles include, for example, Puerto Rico's public grid system has to be safe and dependable. It has to be efficient and agile. For example, if interconnection is to be made and it'll take 4 months, maybe that's not very agile, right? And these are things that we need to think about, yeah? Now, the system is also one that must create incentives for economic development. If we have an interconnection process that's clear and can therefore give some certainty to developers, that fosters economic development. But if no one knows how we're going to interconnect, am I going to interconnect to 5 meg and I have to go to sub-transmission, not distribution, and I don't know where we're at? Well, that goes very against those guiding principles we're trying to develop. Now, this is a pretty extensive list, but I'm not going to go too deeply into detail, but I will go delving into a few. One thing that I do want to demonstrate is, for example, what I'm talking about, the price standards as compared to the new developing standards that we must consider. For example, during, let's say 10 years ago, 2003, maybe 15 years ago, electric interconnections standards were evaluating what was considered to be power flow. Currently, under the new standards, the assessing and the considerations and the testing is underway in order to consider power flow between the equipment and the public grid, as well as the communications method that you make available. And that's very important because these types of communications may include interconnected equipment communication, or it could be communications with the utility directly, which allow flexibility to the public grid that we're going to be discussing. And thus flexibility will grant the ability for the public grid to interconnect more renewable energy. And what everyone wants here, and that's a very important main guideline, is to increase renewable energy interconnection. So I'm not going to go over each one, maybe 2 or 3. One of the things we must consider and for us to think about is whether the testing levels for under FERC SGIP, which is the small generation interconnection procedures, if those initial tests apply currently to Puerto Rico or not, and that must be considered. Currently, these proceedings call upon or are limiting 15% peak capacity for each feeder. So that's a static limitation. As we've been discussing, now that we have communications, then there's more flexibilities. Perhaps those static type of limitations must be reconsidered. Now, batteries, storage systems. Everyone's talking about storage systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that I've seen here in Puerto Rico and in other jurisdictions where we've done some work. I'm an engineer, and I think there's a lot of engineers in the room. Strictly in the pure engineering sense, storage systems cannot be modeled as generation. Attorneys have different ideas, certainly, but we know that sometimes attorneys make black white and white black, and they're really good at that. But now, speaking as an engineer, one battery, one storage system is not generation. Now, if we're talking about regulation for distributed generation, where are the batteries to be? I'll give you 1 or 2 local examples that I believe people are trying to evaluate. Batteries investors do not necessarily have the same inverters as photovoltaic inverters. Perhaps to refer battery systems to photovoltaic inverter systems should be evaluated a little bit. Storage systems, it's interesting. And the contribution that we're making to the group is that we're trying to fully go into the technical aspects in order for us to be able to explore. My hope is that at the end of this workshop, we leave saying that we're able to profoundly and technically explore the various interconnection aspects. Storage systems, for example, we're going to talk about capacity. When one requests or applies for interconnection, one has to state the capacity of the equipment to be interconnected, right? Now, if I have a photovoltaic system, solar panels limit that system's capacity, because those of us who work with photovoltaic systems look at the back of the equipment, and there's a rating, there's a determination, which is the ISC, by the ISC, which is the current. At the current to short circuit that panel, and then I run the calculation. And what about batteries now? And what about storage systems? What's the capacity there? Because now I've got lithium-ion batteries that punch. They kick high potency. So, well, someone could tell me, well, you have an inverter which has a 30 amps breaker, right? Fine. But what happens if that breaker breaks down? Again, we're talking about the technical aspects to ensure security and dependability of the system. if at any time that breaker breaks down or doesn't work, you now have a battery that could discharge a very large capacity. So what I've seen in the past, when I'm then going to get an application or a request for interconnection, what capacity do I list? System, let's say. If I have a storage and photovoltaic system, what capacity do I have to list? The highest capacity that the storage system can give, or do I put the photovoltaic system capacity? The point that we want to bring is that in storage systems, we have to evaluate. And I'm also going to talk about how other states have approached me to, well, vie for their own interests, because most interests of outside utilities are private interests, and they say, well, if you have a storage system, you can discharge the system, but you're also going to ask from my system. That has to be evaluated too, right? What's the difference in connecting a battery that requires a charge and you're asking the utility to give you that electric power or energy versus interconnecting a jacuzzi at your house that's going to pull the same amount? Now, these are the things that are being considered in this space and have to be evaluated. Another thing regarding how the interconnection application is to be made, the system capacity, what's going to be evaluated. We're going to evaluate the nameplate capacity, or we're going to evaluate the system's capacity as to what has been certified operationally, the system for, by a certified electrician. That's another thing that we're going to talk about, certification, because I can have a 10 megawatt system that operationally I've demonstrated will not put more than 1 megawatt on the public grid. So how are we going to make those determinations when the interconnection request is made? Now, we have a lot of standards here, and there's standards that have to be considered, which should apply to Puerto Rico, which makes sense for the Puerto Rico public grid. There's various guidelines, there's various standards, and there's standards that are about equipment. The industry is migrating to certify the system, which means I could have a photovoltaic system, and then after a year, I brought another developer and they put in a storage system, and the system in its totality, the system's functionality would then have to be certified. You also have to see how we can harmonize current standards, which would 8915 and 8916 regulations, in order to see if it still makes sense. And also the effectivity of a procedure that should be plug and play, more expedited for small systems. How is that system working? How can we do it better? And we should also consider solar communities, or what are called microgrids. Those will have more specific standards, because we're dealing with microgrids. You're thinking about the controller, right? And that controller is very specific in matters of how to synchronize with the utility, how to uphold the angle and what we call phase angle when you're interconnecting back to the utility. And in that type of interconnection, we'd have to evaluate some more specific standards. Now, taking a step back, this was where we worked before, which had a lot more with energy flow. Now we're looking at energy flow with communications, because now we have the functionality for these equipment to be able to communicate amongst each other. And one thing that I also wanted to share is that we're talking 8915 talks about distributed generation. Now, what we're hearing out in the space about resources, to say it correctly in Spanish, distributed energy resources. Some distributed energy resources which is DER for its English acronym, these have generation as well as aspects or mechanisms for flexibility, such as response to demand, such as other functionalities to create more intense or better energy efficiency, and to make charge transfers. Perhaps we should at least consider if, in fact, what we're talking about here is generation, or are these facilities that are also going to support the public grid so as to interconnect further renewable energy? So with that in mind, we have this in mind, right? Functionalities for those inverters that are now on the market, which do have the ability to communicate with other inverters without having to make any, what we call in other jurisdictions, without having to make, repairs to the utility. We may be able to increase rather, the available capacity in the distribution feeders, for example. Just one example. Currently, all of these equipment post a megawatt. And this is an example, right? Which gleans into the same distribution line, but using functionality to increase the interconnective capacity. It's the same line, but using communications and compensation functionalities. Now, currently, if compensation for inverters, after 1 megawatt, I've capped the limit of what I can interconnect. Now, with the equipment that's already available out in the market, if I use what is called as BOBAR capacities, which does reactive compensation, the inverter has reactive compensation automatically. If you'd like to either have it on automatic control, or it can also be controlled by the distribution system. Now I can interconnect almost 2.5 times more without making any repairs to the utility. So the point is that this equipment provides additional functionalities to the benefit of the public grid. So how can we incorporate those functionalities in an orderly fashion so that the system operator has visibility to be able to call upon those resources as necessary? One thing that I have in my notes, this is using inverter functionalities, reactive compensation to the lines. We also know that we can increase interconnective capacity when we do the 13.2 conversion, 13.2 kilovolts conversion, which is also on the table. Now, we're also going to talk about the challenges. Currently, there are feeders in Puerto Rico which are obsolete in terms of interconnection capacity. There's a list of them. And this is not a criticism, but rather to underscore what we need to do to improve. Now, this list has various feeders out on Ramey Air Base, and some are already in red, which means they are down. But this is an interesting list because today is June 7th, 2016 on this list. Isn't that interesting? It states that the list shall be periodically updated. 3 years doesn't seem very periodic. Here we have an example of some maps that are publicly available. This is utterly public domain, and it's on the web. These maps detail what is the interconnection capacity at the moment. Some utilities have different timelines. This is probably 1 month or 2 months old, depending on the utility. But here, at least, it lets you know more or less. If I'm in green, perhaps there won't be too much time to interconnect. But if currently there's no capacity, if it's in black, I can't interconnect because it's limited. And these are the feeders in Washington, D.C. Here's Arlington Cemetery, and the Pentagon is further down. Here we can see that in red are the ones that are a bit more saturated, and the ones in green, not so much, less saturation. Here we have, this is at the White House here, and these feeders need a special request, require a special request. So when we enter into the technical considerations, well, mostly three things. If when we interconnect equipment to the public grid, we cause voltage problems. If we go beyond the voltage limits, we know that ANSI has some very strict limits as to how the voltage needs to be. And it's not capricious, it's not whimsical. That's specified thus, because if you go up beyond that voltage, you then begin to burn transformers, the surge arresters that I have in the grid to protect the system. So that also is about protection systems. Protection system that I have on the public grid expect certain specific levels of voltage. And you can see this very well. This is a thermal. Thermal is how much current can I place through a conductor. And that means whether it has a 5 meg capacity, you're not going to put a 2 kilovolts feeder because you're going to burn out my conductor. We also talked a little bit about, well, we've talked about some technical subjects, and there's now procedural subjects that we'd like to proceed with, if you like. One or two if we can. The utility of the cyber portal and how that could improve. What are the challenges there? Also, we'd like to speak about the acceptance tests and applicability of the equipment's list, because some lists are being sent to us to see how applicable that list is to the needs in Puerto Rico. And also something that is truly surprising, because it could make the process more agile, is that currently certified engineers and licensed engineers and certified electricians and board certified can submit their certification to the electric power authorities to renewable energy equipment. Things that I think that, well, I think we're in a good direction. I think we're in a good position. Well, systems beneath the 25 kilowatts can be certified by a licensed engineer, and that makes for an agile process, right? A timely process, which we should consider as to what other things we can do as well in addition to facilitate interconnection. The PIR in Spanish, PIR, for 2015 already includes, I mean, certainly these are simulations. This is not system data, but they've already begun to project and articulate potentially where there may be areas of congestion, and that's great. What could we do to expand upon, to continue the effort that may very well facilitate developers in their efforts? And also, we've already seen various regulations and various orders that it's already being considered. You know, the system's communications functionality, that's where we're headed. So perhaps at some point it may be premature. We want Puerto Rico to be fully clean energy with renewable energy, but it can't be by tomorrow because we have engineering limitations that we have to consider. Public policy in Puerto Rico and many places, 100% renewable. We love that. We're working towards that. But how can we do it in an orderly fashion so that it makes technical sense? That based upon engineering principles makes sense in order to ensure that the public grid is safe and dependable. If we don't have safety and dependability, we don't have the foundation to continue to plan as we must. This is basically what I have. Currently, perhaps what we can do now, we'll go by table. We're doing great so far. First of all, questions, comments, concerns of. So we'll go one by one now. Good. I'm going to hit the lights. I think the switch is in the back. So what we're going to do now, and something that we didn't do, I'm sorry, excuse me, we didn't make introductions. When we do, please state a brief introduction, very briefly, of, it's not about position or title, but what you want to share and participate about. So please introduce yourself so people know at least your first name. Okay, now, from this table, I asked who would like to comment. What we're currently looking for, post having discussed the various subjects. Perhaps you have something specific, or you'd like to expand upon something already discussed and share. At that time, if anyone wishes to respond or include their thoughts about a specific subject, welcome. At this table, if anyone would like to begin, and we have the mic in the middle, please. Please use microphone discipline. You can press the button on the microphone when you see a green light. Good morning, Laura Castillo from CESA. Right. Before you make your comment, introduce yourself to the group, okay? One person per table? Any person at the table who would like to speak, we start at your table, continue. Very good. My name is PJ Wilson, and I'm the president of Solar Energy Storage Association. Good day. Would you like to contribute a comment at this table? And remember, you are the ones who run this workshop, okay? The goal of our workshop is to hear you. So remember, please do articulate your thoughts. There's no silly things to be said here. We need to hear what all of you are thinking to improve our process. Over here. En este momento, mi nombre es Jay, yo estuve involucrada en Hawái y estoy interesada en Puerto Rico, dada la experiencia en Hawái. Bien? So, in Hawaii, there's been such an intense amount of interconnection that they've had problems like we've been discussing. They're interconnecting so many feeders that energy is going upstream, and they're burning LTCs, which are the transformers tap changers. So how to use their experience so that it doesn't happen in Puerto Rico. Excellent comment. Now, knowing that Hawaii and Puerto Rico are both islands, but they do have different consumption. We have quite a bit of industry, and Hawaii doesn't have that much industry. Thank you for the point. Very good. Now, we'll go over here. We'll move in your direction in just a moment, yeah? Yeah, we have pharmaceuticals, but we don't have that much consumption. Very good. Is that capacity or energy what you're saying? Please use a microphone. Thank you. Please do use a microphone, yes. I could tell you that in terms of the Electric Power Authority's income as such. Okay, great, perfect. So we keep moving. Over here. Hi, my name is Lisa Speakers. My question is, when can we access the list of feeders that are about to get over the limit or close to, or already have, or about to. So in this workshop, I recommend that you speak with the PREPA folks. Thank you for your concern, but that's an issue that you should ask the PREPA. Yeah, they can give you information. What would you suggest? That the list should be more accessible, or comments away from the microphone cannot be heard by this interpreter, will not be translated. Well, PREPA's list is from 2016, yeah. Well, what I'm trying to say is that it be made available online by zone as you presented, that they show them in the red or in green for us to know, for people to know. I think that the point that it seems that there will be a benefit for the feeder's information to be placed online as a map. Is that right? That's duly noted. Hello, my name is Mario Landau. I have a question regarding the microgrid controllers that you said there's a list of equipment that is being put together. If we're trying to choose equipment for a microgrid, how are we going to know that the controller we chose will be on that list of equipment that you have? I think that the point there is how to bring clarity as to the equipment that has to be implemented in order to install microgrids. Yeah, okay. What I'd like to say is that this is not a workshop to ask where this is or where that is. What we're trying to see is how we can improve the process, right? For example, the maps could be made available on the internet. If we have a clear list of microcontrollers which are eligible, that's something that should be explored. So to explore means the idea is great. How are we going to implement, right? Now, that takes time and takes effort and takes resources. Perfect. And like I said, if anyone would like to respond to what any participant is stating, please feel absolutely free to do so. Over here. Something to contribute to the group? Good morning, everyone. My name is Reynaldo Baretti. I'm part of the Electric Power Authority's delegation, and we're very thankful for being invited by the Bureau to participate in this exercise. We certainly welcome all your recommendations in order to revise our regulations. I personally had the opportunity to work on the same process during the last regulations revision with our colleague Ingeniero Engineer Maestro, who's here, and the UEP director at the time. And we both take part of a committee under Act 57 of 2014, a committee with instilled, including 3 people. On behalf of the Electric Power Authority was myself, Engineer Maestro, and Engineer Angel Sayas, and we were involved in the public hearings. I know many of you were here, and we heard the recommendations. And in response to that, some internal discussion and voting took place, which resulted in the 2017 regulations, which will now be again revised as part of this process. So again, we reiterate our availability to participate in the process, and we're very thankful for the opportunity to participate and to answer to Lisa. Hello, Lisa. So we acknowledge that that list needs to be updated. In fact, in the last days, we had various regional superintendent meetings and asked for that information to be provided and to validate the information with our planning and research folks to be sure that it be encompassing and comprehensive. Upon the passage of Hurricane Maria, there were certainly changes in the feeder's configuration, which just created a dislocation in terms of that available list. We also have to consider that not all the GDs installed were registered, because some came in via the executive order that was issued post-emergency. So despite that, we still have some regions who have updated their information. We don't have it all But do I do behoove you to, in the case of having any questions about a particular sector, to please contact the region directly. And they can certainly tell you if their specific feeder is beyond the 50% mark or not. So at least in the very short term is what I can offer out until we're able to publish the final list. Perhaps some of my other colleagues would like to also expound. Microphone, please. Yes, good afternoon, Carlos Perez. In that sense, and excellent suggestion, but it's also who at the region, time, when, how long does it take? That valuable process you described, like maybe could be, it's like, what is the supplementary study to cost $700? So a study's done, then can you interconnect? Which is what the answer is generally, that you can interconnect after that study, or survey if you prefer. But you can interconnect, but you know that you get only this amount of capacity to get a bit more data, all right, beyond just the approval, the yay or nay, right? Really, that when you pay those, I'm not sure if he's saying $700 or $300, okay? But perfect. But you need to know whether you're on the cusp or you do have some cushion. We need more data. Now, in terms of the Electric Power Authority, what would be reasonable? What would be a reasonable time frame in order to review the list, update the list? Well, ideally, is that it'd be much more periodic than every 3 years. We have to acknowledge that when that initial list was made, the interest was that it'd be revised every 2 or 3 months at the most, or at least, rather. Perhaps we didn't comply with that, but then after the hurricane, everything kind of was skewed. But I would say that a reasonable time would be 2 or 3 months. Yeah. Now, if there's a very sudden change, that there's a lot of change, then that's a matter of reviewing and updating them to our portal on the internet. Did you want to talk about capacity? Oh yeah, sure. Hello. Good morning. My name is Tomas Velez. I work at the Electric Power Authority. And the department that I lead is basically the one that takes charge of supplementary survey or study. So in our area, we perform those technical surveys in order to determine capacity for intermittent generation that you can interconnect with an electric circuit. Part of the same simulation you see on screen, we work at our department. And as part of the process of evaluating generation system interconnection in industry, various criteria have been established to determine whether you need a technical survey in order to glean whether interconnection is viable or not. Perhaps the most well-known is the famous 15% value. That value is based upon the demand of an electric circuit, and that's taken because it's been used as baseline, that 15% demand value for a circuit may represent the minimum demand for it, and beyond this value, you may have return energy into the distribution circuit. So that could adversely affect the voltage regulation and create spots where there may be over voltages beyond thus established by the NC standard, which is 84.1. So as part of that evaluation, we need to consider not only the capacity of the GD that wants to interconnect, but also its placement, location. That's why, depending on the location and the GD's capacity, is what could determine whether intermittent generation can be interconnected in that part of the circuit or not. Basically, as you can see on the graph, you can find zones where you can find greater possibilities of voltage situations, but you cannot generalize it throughout the circuit because, again, because it's not just about capacity, but it also depends on its placement. That's why, as much ourselves as any other utility in the US, perhaps, is where these technical evaluations are made to determine viability of interconnections. It all depends on various factors, and that's not only capacity, which is what perhaps everybody knows. We also have to consider the voltage levels at the circuit, its location or placement, and how that circuit has been structured electrically in terms of voltage levels and how balanced or not is it as well. I consider that could be something useful for the proposed regulations. What are those criteria prior to sending a case up for the supplementary evaluation? Because generally they're like, this case has been referred to for supplementary survey, but there's no clarity pre-analyses in terms of the evaluation criteria. Obviously, with the notion that the law has changed, so that because perhaps the concern is to know, as part of the communications you received, the reason why the case was referred to supplementary survey. I understand. Yes, indeed. Yes, that's a request. In fact, yeah, you would say. Okay, let's see. What we have to do is report our recommendations to the commissioners. So would I ask the utility here, would it make sense then to consider the graphs or tables that are on CGIP, which are, I mean, it's great that you're talking about the distance between that circuit and the substation. So now you have the distance to the substation and the voltage level. Would it also be feasible? Because if there's tables and the developers can go to the tables, then there's more clarity, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to submit for Interconnection to see what I'm told. Maybe they'll say I'll have to be supplementary and it'll take 3 months. But right from the tables, you know the level. And the level now, that's a matter of Puerto Rico directly. At whatever level it is, then you can design and develop what will be the survey that is necessary. Yes, the reality is that in the regulations themselves that we have in effect currently, this is based on the small generator interconnection procedures. So the regulations themselves incorporate those tables, which are included in our regulations. And basically, as part of the amendment process, the amendment proceedings of 2017, those tables were included that establish, depending upon the voltage level, the distance and the GD's capacity. And in the case of distance, what distance you are to the exit to the substation will then let you know whether that evaluation would require supplementary survey. The way in which these regulations are structured are no different than those established by. You can compare our regulation with the US regulations. You can see that the structure is very similar because it's what's used throughout the US jurisdictions to evaluate these types of interconnections. So to answer your question, those tables under which the voltage level, generation capacity, and the distance from the circuit exit you are is part of our own 8915 regulation. Well, to use those tables will certainly give some clarity. And now let's go a bit more deeper into the S-chip. They talk about systems up to 20 megawatts. How does what they are saying apply? What did we do to adopt those regulations and put them at our disposal? Yeah. Oh, yes, of course, sure. As you well mentioned, thus provides GD up to 20 megawatts interconnection requisites. As you know, the Puerto Rico electric grid isn't necessarily the same as one we may see in the US interconnected systems. Our system is, let's say, unique. Our voltage levels are lower than what we perhaps may see in other jurisdictions, and specifically in the case of distribution, our voltages are also lower. Our voltage go to 13,200 volts. Excuse me. As part of the regulations amendment proceedings, we had an important purpose was to determine viability for us to be able to reach up to 20 megawatts distribution, in particular photovoltaic systems, which is were being connected in Puerto Rico. We made over 300 simulations from our own distribution grid in circuits at various levels of voltage, from 4.16 to 13.2 kBs. And we certainly noted in all our representations that when we interconnected in particular points of the feeders beyond 1 megawatt, the changes or variation was considerable in terms of voltage. Now, it is important that we consider this. Puerto Rico's distribution circuits were not designed necessarily for interconnecting distributed generation systems. Our voltage are lower than what we can find in other jurisdictions, and obviously, thus limits the capacity of intermittent capacity that you can interconnect. Now, we did find that we could adapt SG for distribution system in Puerto Rico with capacities up to 1 megawatt. We were able to demonstrate that with our simulations. All that has been worked. That's a great point, because the SGIP also evaluates transmission. 8915 is distribution, but as we saw in one of the slides, it may be distribution, so we can go to subtransmission. Now, something that may be beneficial is that the regulations tables be perhaps we're not, making any statements, but to explore that if you're X distant from the substation at X capacity, that you're going to operationally inject, not the nameplate capacity. In addition, this is voltage level, then this will be the survey that you need to expect. That way, a survey or study, there could be various types of surveys or studies, but now the developer will know by the tables more or less where they're at and what it's going to cost in the time frame. See? So that perhaps should be explored. Now, let's keep moving a little bit to this area. Yeah. If would anyone like to comment? Good morning to the commission, the participants. I'm Megan Carmen de State RMI. Voy a hablar inglés. Tengo que traducir al español. Quisiera dirigir la conversación a la planificación para baterías y planificación para capacidad en particular, y pedir que la comisión y que la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica considere cómo se implementan las microredes en particular a una escala en la cual puedan al final proveer estos servicios de red que pueden resultar útiles para la capacidad de la red, porque es otro paradigma hoy día. No estamos instalando plantas masivas todas de una vez y por tanto no requiere diferentes tipos de planificación. ¿Y en qué momento es que X número de microredes puedan proveer suficiente estabilidad de la red y al final del día convertirse en un paradigma más de red inteligente para responder a algunos de estos asuntos de capacidad, porque creo que hay mucho potencial? Y para vuestro conocimiento, RMI, trabajamos con utilidades en los Estados Unidos, por ende también podemos proveer algo de nuestro peritaje sobre este asunto también. Muchas gracias. Does anyone have comments regarding microgrids? Great, thank you. Someone over here? Great. Good morning, everyone. I believe that if we're all here, it's because we have the intention or the legitimate interest of making a better regulations and a better electrical grid. And we are therefore part of a community where we all pretty much see each other every day, practically. So there are certain things about regulations that I have some key points, somewhat technical and legal that I'm not an engineer. So the Energy Commission doesn't regulate the authority alone. There are also brethren or sisterin protagonists that should update their regulations, like the Energy Public Policy at OGP, at Budget and Management. Because if you look at the regulation at its end has its legal basis. These regulations is this and the other, but it also covers the other regulations and other things. So if that's a different regulation and those don't get updated, there will then be a clash between various regulations or amongst. like the Equipment Certification Regulation 7599 from 2008, if I'm not incorrect. Recently, a colleague was asking about the microgrid controllers, etc., and how to certify products and equipment, because one of the main challenges that perhaps there's probably more products out there than regulations, right? So how updated could the regulations be in order to be able to comply with the needs of the market, which are constantly in flux and which can perhaps paralyze processes. Another concern that I also have is that regulations consider technical standards, but also economic development and social issues in Puerto Rico, like regulators such as the Consumer Affairs Advocate, etc., should also participate and be aware of process and proceedings, particularly in terms of development of how a supplementary survey takes. We know that there's certain exceptional circumstances that occurred, but also to understand how the regulations interact de facto with other regulations, because it doesn't operate in isolation. It doesn't operate alone. It operates in harmony with OIPC, with OEP, and all the other public instrumentalities. And what we call OGP was our Budget Management Office, and we could have some clashes in that sense. Yeah. Now, I saw during the presentation the modernization technical requisites for the regulations, right? And the question that I throw out, is it feasible? And really? Because the equipment that may be up to code, etc., but the grid, is the grid up to code? Because at the end of the day, then you have that other clash, right? So in that sense, if tomorrow some engineer has to go certify someone's home in X location and the house is not to code, what do we do then? What is the reality truly in Puerto Rico? The practical reality in Puerto Rico for an installation that may be in Baldrich, which is a house that was built in 1980 with no review. And then a certification has to occur, an inspector comes in and looks at the panel, what have you. So that test phase, this location rather, because of it is what we aspire to do. But what do we aspire now in the reality that we have and what we have on hand? So I'd like to talk about whether houses or residences are in code or not. I've worked in various municipalities. Do you think that perhaps it's the essence of having licensed and bar certified electrician so that they can visit a house and make a determination and say, we have to do X, Y, Z before you interconnect? At that moment, as an engineer, will not put a finger on it if it's not up to code. And then we say, look, we got to call a licensed electrician so that they can put you up to code. Then I can interconnect you. That's certainly part of the legislation. But what I'm saying is that it's not only the house down to the house in, from the house out. It's the grid to code. And I'm not saying that they're not, but it's no secret that the grid requires some improvement. So to what degree do regulations serve as a barrier? Because then it becomes so technical and so specialized that then it becomes inoperable. And that is a concern that I'm bringing to our consideration. So market entry barriers, okay? So how to digest the interconnection process to something that could be understood by common folk, if you like. Now, perhaps there may be two, because you also have to look at the technical aspects for engineers to implement. But then there's also perhaps should be in our exploration that interconnection process as something more 101, science 101, so that it could be more clearly understood by lay folk. Look, a basic example. You talked about communication between batteries or whatever. At the end of the day, can it be done right now? Currently? Perhaps yes, perhaps no, I don't know. But the answer, I'm inclined to say no. So why to include things that in fact are nice, very useful, but in the praxis, the day-to-day? I think that the synthesis is what's the applicability of standards currently to the real situation of our grid, of the public grid. Now, certainly, but remember that we're planning, so we should perhaps also explore what determinations have to be made so as not limit functionalities that in the future may benefit the grid. There's a balance between both, I think. My recommendation, technically, because at the end of the day, our colleagues will be saying, no, the regulations say thus, and we can't go against regulations, right? Which is reality. So let's look for a balance in terms of reasonability. Like I heard before, Hawaii would have it. No, Puerto Rico is Puerto Rico. And we have our own challenges and our own opportunities. And we have a law which has its mandates, and we have to comply with its mandates. Yeah? Anyone else? Great. My name is Angel Luis Rodriguez. I'm an energy consultant in the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm here seeing how we can learn more and live here with the best information for our future projects. So my question to the tables is how various industries I understand about, I know 4 pharmaceutical plants that are going to include cogeneration, and that's certainly going to take away some significant demand from the authority. So the plant where I'm supporting now, the monthly consumption is equal to about 10,000 homes. So if that plant that's consuming close to 10 mega, those 10 mega could then purchase just 1 mega from the electric power authority. So that's significantly going to lower the demand at the authority. And how then that will demand the infrastructure, the feeders, and the capacity, and maybe free up capacity. How could that perhaps bring to the equation? Because these are just 4 industries and others that are coming, because eventually we have to be competitive, right? If I see a $1.5 million light bill is pretty common. And if you'd like to see, I got one with me. But that takes away from our competitiveness. And we want to, not only in the industry, but we also have to think about residential and commercial. So my question is, how under this scenario will the system entirely change? These are all great points and to explore with our colleagues at the Electric Power Authority, or PREPA. In a situation such as he describes, I have a cogeneration system and I'm going to supply most of my needs internally. Now the authority doesn't have to feed what I supply to myself, right? But I think that if we look, we should explore the new energy public policy that was, enacted, states that the authority has to be POLR, which is provider of last resort. Now, so if they are the providers who have to be there in case everything else goes down and it still has to you have to get service, that means that after you're supplying yourself right here, still the utility has to keep its facilities able to provide you capacity in case something goes wrong. We have to consider that too, because then you will make a request or we will apply for interconnection. The authority will say, perfect, but I'm still going to have to keep up my lines and transformers in case you go down. I can supply you, and that has to reflect somewhere. In fact, as part of what would be required is that in the case of those cogeneration systems to have to be in maintenance, you have to tell the Electric Power Authority with notice that they're going to be under maintenance so that they're ready to, whether you're currently supplying me with just 1 mega, but in 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to have to give me 10 now. And that system has to be available. Yes, you have to uphold capacity, but you also have to have that flexibility because that's what we're heading, in fact. True. Yeah, we're looking for flexibility for the interconnection of cogenerators so it's not so static. Indeed, we are. That's a great point to explore. Sure. Quisiera responder al pedir que le demos nuestra atención a la ley 88 que requiere que algunas instalaciones tengan cierto número de días de energía almacenada. Hospitales y otros tienen que tener 20 días de su propia energía almacenada. Así que mi pregunta para la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica es ¿qué ocurre si estábamos en un área en la cual la capacidad de la línea no provee esa oportunidad, pero que se les requiere por ley tener su propia generación y capacidad de baterías o cogeneración? ¿Y cómo entonces abordamos ese tipo de problema? Let me quickly interrupt. Like we said, in terms of the rules, so we could speak more openly and discuss. If our colleagues at the Electric Power Authority would like to contribute individually, that being on behalf of the Electric Power Authority, please feel absolutely free to do so, because it's a pretty specific question. The workshop isn't really to answer. We will address, because we want to share ideas. But if you'd like to do this as an individual, these are part of the rules, and you don't speak on behalf of your respective employers or entities. Con respecto a la cogeneración que se solicita y recibimos de varias industrias, no hemos refutado ninguna solicitud. I'll be happy to interpret for you. The requests we've received for cogeneration, well, we haven't denied any. Now, what the Electric Power Authority does restrict is the exportation of energy into our system. Cogeneration that has been allowed has to be less than the minimum demand to be consumed by this industry. So what the Electric Power Authority has restricted or has not allowed is the export of that energy that may be produced by that cogenerator. But we have never denied any cogeneration requests for any particular industry. That hasn't happened. What is restricted is the energy export, the power export. And for our former colleague, when you have made interconnection requests, what has been your experience in processes? The process has been friendly, let's call it. We've been facilitated in terms of interconnection. We're still in a quite preliminary phase, but we have worked hand in hand. They've been facilitating in this sense. But I would like to verify is how regulations 8916 would apply for these interconnection systems where there's no net metering, and that a cogeneration system is not considered either. When you talk about natural gas, that's not considered to be renewable. So how would that regulation apply under those conditions? That is something that we need to consider. We do have an interconnection process, and we have different regulations. The 16, 15, 89, 15, and 16. Would it be a good idea after the interconnection? After it's, as long as it's interconnection, have like a tome, or maybe do we leave it as it is? Well, expounding a bit upon the engineer's concern, basically, in terms of interconnection, cogens, for whom we've received requests for transmission voltage connected grids or systems, there's certain requisites like the exit meter and the communications capacity for folks from our operations and the protection scheme so there's no reverse power in export. That has been adapted or integrated into the interconnection regulations for 8916 for clients to the transmission line system grid. Now, there are certain things that are exempt, like the requirements, because they don't have the same fluctuations or intermittence as associated to GDs. But we do have to mention that the micro grid interconnection regulations will be published, and I think that the Bureau has certainly taken charge, given the Electric Power Authority's inability to issue it on time. So my understanding is that the Bureau is working on a draft for those regulations, which obviously would be very interested to see once the draft is ready, so that we can make our comments and recommendations. But as far as I understand, is going to be addressed separately. Interconnection of GDs or DRs, however you'd like to call them, and interconnection and of microgrids as such. As far as I know, there will be two independent regulations for both. Does that make sense to have independent regulation for that? And we're talking here openly, okay? Does it make sense to have those, that amount, one for the solar communities, other for microgrids, other for transmission, sub-transmission? That's what we're here, right? For, right? Because that's something that could be evaluated, you see? Now, if part of making the process clearer and more timely, perhaps it would be a good idea to have a tome with various chapters, something to consider. Please introduce yourself and your comment. Yes, good morning. Engineer Jose Capeles. I currently preside upon the Special Energy Commission at our association, and I have my colleagues here also from our commission. But I'm here on my own behalf as engineer Jose Capeles. The association makes its own recommendations to the Bureau at its given time. And currently, we do have the president's or chair's request to identify educational programs that allow the professionals whom we represent to be better prepared to support all the efforts related to energy policy. And obviously, in support of the transformation of the Electric Power Authority and those aspects that have been under discussion here. Now, I would like to mention regarding Jorge or Engineer Camacho's question has been at the end of his intervention. How will we be doing this in an orderly fashion? Obviously, there's a series of details that have been discussed which are of concern to me, because I do think that we need to answer the question and to be careful as to what actions are to be made to impede us from doing things well in an orderly fashion, and that can also be implemented optimally as well. So, while we're looking for the answer to that question, there are actions underway that perhaps make harmonizing with that new energy policy more difficult. Now, amongst the aspects that are under discussion, well, often, I personally, and I think everyone here has noted that there's a lot of talk about generation. There's a lot of focus on generation. We forget about transmission and distribution. How is it that, for example, these solar farms may affect consumers' opportunities to put solar on their own roofs? There's also talk about lacking capacity at 13.2 gigs is not viable to 1 mega, and how we are to limit. How do we work on the limitations that impede us from implementing that energy policy, and that those opportunities we're discussing here that exist for the energy transformation to be able to be implemented further, perhaps? What do we need to do now to prepare, even if certain actions take longer, or to focus on the actions at the sphere of the greatest needs? And I know there's a lot to do. I'm talking here about the Electric Power Authority that can be made to strengthen the system, while these other alternatives are the base of which that we need for a more viable future and establish the change, so that eventually the association will make its own recommendations to the Bureau directly. We're working actively in that regard, and currently what we want is to help for those whom we represent. Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us here. Something we should consider in terms of the part of the law that talks to the under 25 kilowatt systems that an engineer and a certified and board licensed and board certified electrician can do. Some things say they have to be certified for photovoltaic hills. Some people talk about the North American Board of Energy Providers. But perhaps we should explore what can we do here in Puerto Rico to certify people who install in Puerto Rico. So we need to explore what those certifications are to be, that the Bureau is going to avail as something done right. We have a comment over here. Yes, by all means. Do you have a microphone? Okay, great. Great. If you'd introduce yourself first too, please. Stand by. Testing. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Olmos. I am a new installer. I installed photovoltaic panels at my home. I behoove all the experts because I am a Google engineer. I go to Google and I research, and I'm very pleased with my installed solar panel. And I'm waiting for the distinguished authority to do what they must to do net metering, but I'm not in a hurry. That's up to you. So what I need, the systems need to be as simple as possible. You know, Creoleized. Creole certifications don't work. Do we know that the localized associations really do everything they can to put pitfalls before the citizens' opportunities? I want a national standardized certification that is known by everyone. Simple. Keep it simple. That's my philosophy. Keep it simple. Stupid. Kid system. Keep it simple. Stupid. So no more unnecessary government intervention to penalize individual citizens. I have the right to enjoy free or cheap, good, and cheap energy when I need it. I lived without any light for 11 months. I know I can do it. And now I have solar panels. I behoove the Electric Power Authority to pull itself by its bootstraps, because if not, they're going to be left behind. In the valley where I live in Guaynabo, installing solar panels, I got up on the roof with an installer and a well-known engineer, and I had noted, with me, there's 10 houses that have solar panels right there in that valley. I hadn't noted. I didn't realize. Therefore, the engineers, a college of engineers, and all these specialists that I know a lot more than me. You better get busy, because at the end of it, the only thing I have to do is I hit the breaker and I'm disconnected from the authority. If the system doesn't work, or it doesn't work, or doesn't work to full capacity, doesn't matter, because I have what I need when I need it. Because I'm not there during the day, I'm there at night when I need the energy. Therefore, if the Electric Power Authority and all the distinguished officers, representatives, and specialists here make things even more complicated, we're going to get out of this, leave the grid even quicker. You've already lost one customer who paid $25 million because you weren't paying attention. They're called Roosevelt Roads Navy. They paid $25 million light bill per year. If you don't get busy, you may lose more millions of dollars in clients. So I behoove you to make as simple as possible of a system, and I behoove the agency that you preside upon to pay particular attention to individuals, citizens. All we need is good, dependable, cheap energy. All the other technical aspects, I really don't care. Whether you have a 15% capacity, I get off the grid and I'm done. You are concerned about the bureaucracy. Well, I have to share, I as a citizen, as a particular, I have to fight the oil cartel. Now we have to fight the gas cartel. Now we're going to put together the photovoltaic association so that we can create the residential association for photovoltaic, because they're screwing us, I quote. How long do we have to do this? How long? Great, thank you. No, really. But I am happy with the authority, because I know the effort, extraordinary effort, I know. And if you resolve the net metering, I'll be even happy. Duly noted. But otherwise, if not, I'll be off the grid and that's it. Okay, got it? Great, thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Good morning. Leave the speakers again. What I did want to mention is that the Public Energy Policy Office does have the certified electricians and engineers who have taken the photovoltaic course, so the system exists already. Now, what I want to say is that we don't have to add any further programs nor courses, because it's there for licensed electricians as well as engineers. And it's a program that's already running, right? And is out there certifying. Oh, yes, it is. Absolutely. Well, what would be good if someone from the office was here? I know that Ruyan is here, but I don't know that he's not there anymore. I don't know if there's anyone here. No, I'm just saying, But wouldn't it be good for that system to be more accessible electronically and up to date, we have to consider that as well. Currently, we can verify who is a licensed engineer by going to the internet and say, okay, license, great. Perhaps that's one way. For installers, a certification that can also be connected to the internet. Because one thing we should explore, please use your microphone. Please use your microphone. The client or customer at the end of the day, who may need to verify, number one, so that people on the street aren't being, taken advantage of. And also just for people to be able to get information to know that people are, up to date and certified and all of that. Okay, over here, great, 1 second. Yes, good morning. My name is Francis Berrios. I'm here on behalf of the Puerto Rico Licensed Electricians School, excuse me. So currently, the Office for Energy Policy has made some changes, and during this change, their interactive web page where all the installers were listed is not available. But in the case of engineers and licensed electricians, they have a valid ID that demonstrates their credentials. There are certain things that are certainly necessary to protect our customers, and I agree with our colleague, but there are already various mechanisms to be able to present oneself adequately. But we do have to orient the public that they need to demand such credential from the well-trained professional who could do the installations. That's all. Engineer Gerardo Cosme. My observation, many of which I also share, there's been a lot of talk about the interconnection of GDs or connection of GDs. I know there's many ways to connect. There's GDs, for example, that by design of the inverter or by programming of the inverter, you could have self-consumption or it could export energy. And I think that a different consideration should be made when you evaluate interconnection when the system doesn't export energy as to when it does export energy, even whether it's a GD, photovoltaic GD. Great, thank you for your comment. And let me expound a bit more regarding the technical aspects. Now, I'm gonna give you a specific example. We have a hybrid photovoltaic system that we added storage to. So we're saying, what's the capacity of the system? But the capacity of the battery is difficult to gauge or specify. So what is the mechanism that the Electric Power Authority have to ascertain whether that battery doesn't export to the grid, because there are controls for an island to be created downstream from the Electric Power Authority, and that the utility be able to say that, okay, they're not exporting from the battery. They may be able to export from the photovoltaic system, but the battery. So then the answer would be the battery has some controls. We're talking about the communication functions. So the battery has some controls. The equipment's brain tells the battery that when the authority isn't available, it not be allowed to export. Now, when the authority is there, that they cannot export either. What the battery can do is supply the various charges that the system needs. Or now we're migrating a bit away as to where the new standards are headed. Now, at that time, the utility has to allow for control systems and also be able to communicate with systems. And if there's no certifications that the systems work in X, Y way, then how will the authority know? Oh, the battery. Well, I have a controller, and the controller knows, because if the authority goes down, I can unplug the battery because that controller will turn my battery off. But this is a control issue now. And that is being seen in equipment here in Puerto Rico as well. Do you have some comments regarding these systems that are already being seen, who do have certain features that are based on a controller in order to modify the system's operation, depending upon the grid status, right? Good morning. My name is Raul Perez, Electric Power Authority, Engineering Distribution Division. With regards to the gentleman's comment regarding storage systems, well, in fact, we have a series of lackings in our regulations and on our portal to be able to identify the information regarding batteries. Yes. At some point, there was a comment or there was talk about the possibility that the engineer draft a white paper that describes the functioning of the system and to explain whether it goes to the portal, not to the portal, does it charge from the battery or just directly from the photovoltaic renewable? And amongst all these possibilities, in fact, it's quite encompassing, the potential combinations. But in fact, we currently lack any way for the authority to be able to issue a certification on how the system operates. Most indicate that they're backups, which are the ones that impact the system the least or the grid, because they wouldn't be exporting when the grid is present. It's only when the grid isn't present is when this battery provides the charge that have been designed into the critical charge panel. So in fact, regarding that, we need to work a bit more in detail so that that information is available for us. Also, there are systems that are too open and allow consumers, post installation and approval, to tell the system to operate however they wish. If that is the case, whenever that customer changes the mode of operation, that would require a new evaluation because they changed its way of operation. So those systems should be protected in such a way that only the manufacturer or installer can make changes to the system once installed and approved. So the issue of the subject of energy with storage is ample. There's way too many options, which should all be discussed. That's a very important point because, and I'll give you an example. Currently, there's hybrid photovoltaic and storage systems that consumers can have their app on the iPhone and can tell backup to export. And it just takes a button. So if you told the electric power authority that you're not going to export and you have the customer at home and they change and you export, how are they going to know? These are things, like we said, planning. We know that that equipment exists. They're not coming. They're around. Huh. I can take you guys down. Oh, that they're not registered, right? Yeah. So the gentleman talked about bureaucracy. Well, currently we do have inverters. I'll talk a bit more specifically. I know that there's people here who have a bit of history. I don't know if you remember when this there were desktops. There were only tabletop computers, desktop, and when you would connect to APC ops, that's a battery. But that battery doesn't interact with the authority. And now we have inverters that interact with the authority, which perhaps someone purchases on eBay, Amazon, and nobody knows. That's a problem. Well, let's go. We can go back to square one. You know, we're all here, but who certifies the equipment? In Puerto Rico, who certifies the equipment? In accordance with the regulations and the 2014-001 for budget and management, or OPPE, for example. I'm not going to get into legal affairs, but who certifies them? We have the equipment regulations are there updated because OPE is who issues certification. So if we're able to have all of that, And there's also a white paper by Engineer Maeso when the regulations were issued. He was the chair at OPPE, and he was asked about recommendations about products and equipment. There's a full memorial, and it's not all in 8915, okay? It's a separate source. But what I'm saying is that regulations are dynamic and they interact. It's not about adding bureaucracy, but to also keep in loop these other regulations that have to enrich in parallel so all of this to be possible. Hello, good morning. My name is Kyle from Bupra Energy, but my Spanish is very bad. Bupra Energy comenzó en Hawái hace 15 años y es totalmente cierto que se pueden programar estos sistemas para exportar cuando uno quiere o cuando no quiere que lo hagan. Y como lo hemos trabajado en California, es que eso tiene que ser con una contraseña por parte del instalador. Así que estos sistemas no son nuevos, se han usado mucho en muchas diferentes jurisdicciones y mercados. Quizás son nuevos aquí. Y en Hawái, la cosa más fácil que hacen ellos es que ellos tienen una lista de invertidores calificados, los 14H, una lista bastante simple, con tal de que tu inversor está en la lista, califica. Y esos fabricantes son los que tienen que hacer el esfuerzo para probarle a ustedes que cumple con sus calificaciones. ¿Bien? Así que no estamos totalmente reinventando la rueda, simplemente podemos solamente dejarnos llevar por reglamentos de otros lugares que funcionan. Eso es lo bueno de Puerto Rico, que ustedes todavía tienen medición neta, así que eso sí complica el asunto un poco, claro. Pero es muy simple en Hawái. Se dice no exporta jamás, así que no importa si viene de la batería o del panel, simplemente no se exporta. Así que creo que algunos de ustedes obviamente están muy al tanto que el programa S-Chip, y ellos han tomado en cuenta muy cuidadosamente lo que ustedes están haciendo, si están cargando con la batería, cargando directamente del fotovoltaico, descargando de ambas. Y la meta de ellos no fue necesariamente resiliencia ni calidad. Ellos simplemente querían garantizar que su dinero estaba reduciendo los gases de invernadero. Así que ellos tienen una razón bastante altruista y pues fue práctico. Así que les exhorto que utilicen la lista calificada de inversores 14H. Me parece algo bastante fácil en corto plazo. Y que las compañías de los controladores sean sus amigos. Para estos recursos de distribución distribuida podría ser un gran activo, no tiene que ser un obstáculo, con tal de que lo hagamos bien, correcto. Al estar tanto tiempo en la industria solar, sí quiero decirles que esta reunión aquí es maravillosa. No sé que he estado en una reunión como esta en mi carrera entera, donde hay tantas partes interesadas que tengan la experiencia, la voluntad y ahora también la tecnología, toda junta. Estamos en una muy buena posición, a pesar de que aparenta ser una conversación un poco estresante. Así que nada, desde Hawái, aloha. Gracias. Gracias por los comentarios. We were around here somewhere. Good morning, commissioners and moderator and all, Javier Rua, on behalf of Sunrun. And in the spirit of what Blue Planet mentioned, this road has been walked in other jurisdictions. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, indeed. I do believe that one challenge regarding this stakeholders meeting today, seeing how the conversation is heading, includes to somewhat separate complex and technical issues from things that are, let's call them low-hanging fruits. No, thank you. I can translate fine. Thank you. From our own perspective, and Public Policy Act 7 distinguishes small systems from larger systems and runs a 25 kilowatt line, but really there's no small systems around that are 25 around here. We see very lower average kilowatts. Now, with regards to that type of small system, Puerto Rico is not even at 0.3% penetration. I think it's 0.24, okay? So there, to bring the issue of Hawaii somewhat complicates our conversation because Puerto Rico really has no penetration of renewable generation to speak of. And what we've seen and what we have heard throughout the day, in terms of small generators, we've heard more about bureaucracy than what are truly technical subjects. These are subjects which, like the Electric Power Authority, has major challenges, and certainly it is in a difficult position with regards to organization, fiscal, and as far as that, we know that current public policy presents with some arguments about small projects that talks to 25 kilowatts, but let me tell you, we haven't seen anything past 10 that we truly be able to trust certification of people that are truly duly certified to certify. So it's about changing the onus, the burden of proof upon the engineer. It's been tried in the past. That's not new in Puerto Rican legislation, but I think we should get accustomed to truly accept that that's the standard. And if that's the standard, then certified systems truly should be certified systems that can be certified quickly. It's not a request. It's look, here it is. And that the entire bureaucratic process changes its focus to, if inspections have to be made, then they be post hoc, not a priori. And if it's an issue of the feeder, when then you change it like regulations say, and then the burden of proof moves and the cost moves to industry to pay. But legislation looks to prevent all of these roadblocks that we've seen for small systems, and like the distinguish amongst the technical issues from larger systems as to smaller systems, right? Because I have seen how the conversation is moving. It's mixed. The issue of interconnections, if it were a major problem in Puerto Rico, a major technical issue, when in the smaller scale, it should never be at all. But I do congratulate the group. And I also echo the good faith line that the Bureau has created, also as mentioned by our Blue Planet colleague, that these meetings of stakeholders do have a very important effect of informing a good future regulations. So congrats. I have a comment, please. May I? Hello. Tomas Velez over here. Pardon me. Thank you. Yeah, Tomas over here. Thank you. It is important that we're clear that the fact that a generation system is small does not mean that perhaps the aggregate that we may have on a circuit at the grid sphere may have an effect on the electrical grid. It is important that we consider this studies and the analyses that as much ourselves at the Electric Power Authority as those we've seen on papers from other jurisdictions thus demonstrate. That it's not simply to consider, just as we had said at the beginning, the capacity of a system that wants to be interconnected. But let's remember that the effect of interconnections is based on various criteria, one of which is the placement, the other is capacity, and then the aggregate is also an important value to consider within a specific circuit zone, and the way of the electrical grid to operate in the case of Puerto Rico, for example, as well as the voltage levels that we have here on the island. So it is important that we be clear that in fact, truly, distribution of generation is easier to manage in electrical circuits. However, we also have to consider that aggregate factor, or the large concentrations of generation that can occur in two ways. Either the aggregate has of many smaller contributors give you large capacity, or a large player in a particular circuit. So don't forget that we should not only consider capacity in order to understand the effect that it may have on the electrical grid. Thank you. Duly noted. And it is true, in fact, no doubt. Now, with regards to technical matters, legislation states to when you have a feeder that's full, you just have to quickly change it and then absorb the costs to prevent that long evaluation period. But in terms of evaluating capacity, we also have to have the discussion that that's not necessarily a negative thing. We have seen in other jurisdictions, such as some companies that aggregate systems actually bring great benefits to the grid. Like with the communications between equipment that you talked about. Even though the executive order is not in effect post legislation, but there's no doubt that in the future, not even in the future, even today in New England, for example, our company Sunrun beat normal gas baseload in a bid for capacity, beat gas, adding roofs and batteries. And that has never happened before. So the idea that the aggregation of renewable systems is necessarily a negative effect is something that has really transcended quite a bit when we talk about coordination and well-planned and well-communicated efforts. It's very great to have the perspective from pharmaceutical companies and more residential clients as well to explore, because that's what we're doing here. We're exploring. And I know that the utility, not in Puerto Rico, in other jurisdictions as well, utilities are up to here. And they have all these requests for interconnection, and they're all up to here, they're hit their capacity. And systems, like you say, they're not 25 kW, they're 10, or just like the gentleman in the back. They want to interconnect as swiftly as possible. Now, if you already have certified engineers, what have you, do you have something to say, sir? Yeah. Please use the microphone, though, because I can't translate him. I would greatly appreciate the use of a microphone. Stand by. There will be no translation till I hear them. In order to be able to help, a perspective that we may be able to explore is that the law already states that licensed and engineers and electricians that be board certified and licensed, and installers that are also licensed and board certified could say, look, here's your certificate, your system's ready to go. At which point, then the Electric Power Authority becomes an auditor, right? So instead of an audit, when one performs an audit, one doesn't grab each one, you do a sample. You do a sampling of what is representative of what's happening in terms of the interconnection of certain service areas. So when you have a certificate, it's great, because then you have all of these engineers doing a lot more work. And then they go to the Electric Power Authority. Look, I have all these certificates, and the authority audits what they think they need to audit. Any comments? Hello, Raul Perez. I agree with regards to certification, as the engineer states, but indeed that the certification does have to, as it is to date, to me, is not in compliance. It has to be a lot more encompassing, because engineers are going to certify the installed system. So that's a combination of the certificate of the inverter that was, first certified by the laboratories before it was put on the market. Then it needs to be certified to be used in Puerto Rico. The Electric Power Authority's evaluation to approve equipment is for interconnection with the authority, to work in parallel with the authority. So it's a different criterion. I understand your point. So what would be necessary? What else would we need so that what comes from a certifier be where you want them to be? Most systems that are being interconnected currently are with batteries, okay? Now, the same thing we had talked about already. The way of operation of the system, no engineer who certifies to date states the mode of operation of the system. Firsthand, because the form doesn't provide, there's no specific question for that, which says, tell me how the system is working. And in addition to that, many other details that we'd have to specify. Does it export, does it not export, right? The photovoltaic system, right? So the battery, what mode of charge is it in? Is it going to charge solely from renewable energy? Can it be charged from the utility? Can it be charged from a generator installed on the property? All of that information should be contained within the certification of how the system operates under the various scenarios. For the authority to then, in fact, have the true gist of how the system is working. This is by way of example. So that would be what I understand that should be included as a minimum within an engineering certification for the system installed. And if I'm not wrong, I believe that in some jurisdictions, they ask the system's manufacturer to certify the system installed post-installation. So it's not just about certifying the inverter to be in compliance with various standards, but rather we're talking about the operational certification. Yes, in fact, there's certain standards, and remember, we voted last night that the developer or whomever is just certified this standard has to certify the entirety of the system installed, and that includes the modes of operation that have been witnessed. And that you tell me, oh yeah, no, they have to be witnessed, and they were documented in order to certify. I think that should be explored. Could be explored, rather. My understanding that with that regard, I think that education and certifications should be updated in terms of the existing programs that our association offers and other institutes, so that engineers are truly capable of doing all these types of assessments and tests in the field, and that there be standardization of methods and procedures, how things are to be done, so that it's uniform. And the forum too. Well, hold on, yes, by all means. May I, if you allow me, following that line, and this is a very important conversation because here, sometimes it's like where procedures get stuck. As far as I see, the Electric Power Authority has knowledge of certain technical elements that I have no doubt the Electric Power Authority personnel, be it via internal training, has this knowledge or have this knowledge, and perhaps they're saying that certification that comes from this engineer or expert is missing ABC. But we really need to go to what Act 17 is asking, that the knowledge is no longer at the authority, that authority be in all engineers, in all experts, electricians. So there has to be a way for the Electric Power Authority to train via the electricians and engineers associations, so that knowledge trickle down to everyone. So then they will no longer have to depend on their personnel, but also the professionals that also have ethics codes and are responsible professionals. So we have to move it along those lines, because if we trickle down that information, if we keep our professionals duly updated in terms of knowledge, then many of your responsibility is then freed up. And then we move to what Camacho was saying, which is you become auditors. People certify out there, people get connected, and you guys then, whenever you're concerned about any aggregate, go, I'm seeing a lot of systems here. Let me do a few audits in that area. And then your personnel will be willing and available and accessible more quickly. I think that's the line that we need to combine in the process. Okay? All right, that's where we're headed. I agree with your statement. And my understanding is that here, industry, manufacturers of equipment, Schneider's, for example, and others, Sony, all those are out there being used in Puerto Rico currently, must have personnel to train. Once what the duly procedures are to be identified in common that we all have to observe in order to certify a system in operation. Well, each manufacturer, in my experience, for example, Enphase, that sat with us and discussed what we were asking for testing certifications at that time, and he says prepared a training from the company and how, based upon their own system, they could assure compliance with the Electric Power Authority's requisites, and they've presented in various training events. Yep. So just as Enphase did, I think the other manufacturers also must contribute and put out their own technical personnel to give that training, so that in fact the engineers who work with the installation or the electrician are aware and know what the various modes of operation are to be. But each manufacturer has their own rules, so that would thus correspond to each particular company to have their personnel available to train engineers and electricians, licensed engineers, peritos, as experts. So without going into the merits, right, what have you, could we not? And also the regulation about the portal. How do we work with the portal, right? So that it also be part of this dynamic and not to leave it as an afterthought in the process. In our discussion, I bring this as a recommendation, yeah? May I make a comment? Sure. I fully agree. The portal needs to be updated, yes. And for example, with regards to the law, in my understanding, as to what the law mentions as to having to present a certification, and that be sufficient for the system to be installed and then go to net metering, what have you, that's great. But where do we then deposit the information? My understanding that it would be for the proponent. Call it request, application, registry, whatever you'd like, but that should be who enters the information into the system, into the data portal, because then they'll be asking us for reports on where do we get the data. So that point is also important, that it be upheld. Yes, Tomas Velez, just to add to what Raul was commenting, that point he brings is very important, because we, as the Electric Power Authority, if we want to be responsible as to the results of the surveys and studies that we do, it's important that the data that we use as baseline for our studies be appropriate and in accordance with our network, our grid's reality. I'm very concerned that interconnections occur and the Electric Power Authority have no record as to where those interconnected systems are. Again, if I don't have the information as a planner and as a person in charge of the surveying as to where the interconnections have been placed into the grid and their capacities, I could easily be performing evaluations and doing runs with results that are not in accord with reality. And the recommendation that I can give as an engineer will be based on the study results. And if the results don't respond to the reality, the recommendation that I then may issue could, instead of resolving a condition, could worsen it. That's why what Engineer Raul Perez is saying is so important, that all the interconnections that occur have to be duly registered and the Electric Power Authority be privy to all of them, so that any evaluation we have to make regarding GD integration and any recommendations we may issue in order to manage these interconnections be adequate. An interesting tidbit, since we're anecdotal, recently I had a case in court, which was because the supplementary survey took too long. Everything was resolved fine, but the issue is that when the judge requests the Electric Power Authority to simply state whether the supplementary was underway or not, in the portal, the authority said, "Look, we can't print the data." This I shared as an opportunity. He asked the judge to go to the region's computer. They had to do print screen prints. There was no document anywhere. That's how the case was immediately solved for everyone fine. But this is an opportunity. In other venues, when one has to glean into the data from the hard drive to maybe present it before the commission or in any other forum, so that to glean it comprehensively is impossible. The software doesn't let you download the entirety. I don't know how much that is true about all of the data in the system, but in our case, it was an interesting interesting development. Thank you so much for all your comments. And now to try to redirect what we're going to be doing this afternoon, we're looking for challenges. Currently, I've heard challenges how data is being captured, visibility that the utility may have to know what's connected and not. That's a challenge, I would say. And remember, we're trying to identify challenges so that in the afternoon we can sit down to look for solutions to those problems in order to put them in our recommendations report. As a commission, we have some people here that would also like to speak. Please hail forth towards the microphone. Thank you. I'm sorry, at the beginning I didn't know we were just going to say, but I thought we were going to say only our name. I've only been here about 1.5 years here in Puerto Rico. I'm from Missouri, from a completely regulated market. I could tell, and I would like to say, and I would like to thank everyone here, the Commission, the Energy Bureau, rather, and how it's growing into its role as regulator to the utility and you at the Electric Power Authority, who are the most important stakeholders here, one of them. And we, from industry, in solar, and storage, some consumers, and we have a professional moderator. We have all the elements in this room to give great feedback to the Bureau, I believe. I would like to reinforce something that the Commission Chair said here earlier. We have to remember what the law says, and part of the law specifically, which changes the onus from the Electric Power Authority to professional engineers to say that a system is certified. They certainly do have to confirm it, but the responsibility falls on the shoulders of engineers. At a higher level, the Act 17 requires the swiftest global transformation and carbon independence towards renewable energy. It's like trying to shoot for the moon. In the last 5 years, how renewable energy, So maybe there's a lot of knowledge in this room, but perhaps there are things beyond what we're thinking that we're going to have to do, because it's a very radical change is what I mean. And the change to interconnection is also a radical change. It's certainly not a small change. It's something very, ambitious, right? So once we have systems that have been certified from Windbar New Energy or whomever, any company, all the technical matters that we are discussing are very important. The Electric Power Authority has to confirm that the system is working properly with all of these energy generators, be they solar, that are being connected. But what the law does not allow is that this process take more than 30 days for systems below 25 kilowatts, and cannot take more than 90 days for the larger systems, all the way up to 5 megawatts, all of which are important. But the process is currently backwards. Instead of asking permission to interconnect, you actually have to file a report by the professional engineer or licensed and board certified electrician that the installation is in accordance with all the existing regulations. Microgrids are also very important. And I think that the main issue here today is distributed generation systems below 25 kilowatts and those beyond 25 to 5 megawatts. And from our point of view, from industry, those 30 or 90 days are firm. So from our point of view, the onus is that on the 31st day or on the 91st day, we have to fine. We have to impose fines if the system hasn't been, if the meter hasn't been installed, and if the net metering hasn't been applied on day 31st for the small systems, day 91 for the larger systems. We need to impose fines because they're late. the Electric Power Authority could take 6, 9 months, 2 years if you want to verify that the system is in accordance with the rules, but you can't make clients to wait that entire time. Act 17 responds to an emergency post-Hurricane Maria. The emergency still continues. We can't wait till after the hurricane season to connect all the systems that are already awaiting certification. The law is clear, 30 days and 90 days, those are firm. I believe that it's important that we remember that the governor signed this law on 11th April, and one of the intents of the law is to put into effect the executive order under the state of emergency for people to be able to interconnect their systems without asking permission from the Electric Power Authority. That goes all the way to the law so that it becomes permanent forever. And what does this state of emergency pursue? Well, the governor of Puerto Rico and the president of the United States say there's still a very grievous state of emergency in Puerto Rico, and therefore we have the act. And we think that the law is as if it were still a blackout, because we're waiting as if we were in a blackout 2, 3 months more. So is this going to be the same every year? And finally, I'd like to repeat, right now, there's no request for interconnection. There's only a report that installation has already occurred by a professional engineer or board certified licensed electrician. And that certification is done by the engineer and the electrician, not the Electric Power Authority. All of these things are very important, but they're coming up, I guess they happen in the other direction. Thank you, PJ, for sharing and not making us translate you. Great. One question in your mind, PJ, I think you're talking about smaller systems below 25 kilowatts. What's the challenge in your mind that we should try to attack? I think you're talking more about procedures or proceedings. Well, if we could leave at the end of the day with recommendations from PREPA and all of us, what information do they need to make informed decision? And more than just one sentence that says you're connected. We need a diagram that shows what components and whether they're approved by OGPE. We need a lot of things, but what are those bunch of things? We can define this here today and thereby confirm in 2 weeks. Okay, that's what it is. We do the easy work for them. We make the work easy for them, rather. If we could all be in agreement here, then their work will be super more easy, I quote. But we're talking about all systems, those below 25 kilowatts. Yeah, certainly, that's automatic. But for the larger systems, it's 90 days. There's not a great difference between 30 and 90 days. Supplementary studies that take a year, 2 years sometimes, they could still take that long, but they only have 90 days to apply and to change the meter. That's a challenge, but you need to grow in your staff to be able to achieve that 30 and 90 days. That's it, done. Javier Rua from Sunrun. And in order to expand a bit, we have been talking about allowing sufficient understanding amongst stakeholders to have the correct regulations and public policies into the future. But there is a fundamental fact. Legally, obviously, the legal part is one, and the technical part is another. But legally, the argument could be brought that all regulations, standard, or policy that is not in compliance with what Act 17 says today is non-existent. And anything that is not in compliance with Act 17 today, well, is in default and should have legal consequence. And I do believe that there is a practical issue that there's no doubt that we have to have the correct regulations, period, and to achieve that. But there is another objective fact that today, we're here. What are we going to do today? And for example, as an organization, as an industry, we've had extraordinary meetings with the Electric Power Authority. We have to say that, by which the Electric Power Authority is doing what's possible to move forward, and even memorandums, technical memoranda, or directives have been sent out to the regions to move forward. And in this discussion, then, these are actions that are being made now that the Bureau could also take to formalize the things that are happening now, and not to wait for regulations to be issued to improve. There's a reality that has to be addressed today as well. Okay, thank you. Definitely, there's a sense of urgency. I'm going to have to summarize, or what we have been discussing. It seems, at least as far as I understand, we seem to be talking quite a bit about the systems that an engineer can certify, which are the systems below 25 kilowatts. It seems that we've explored that there's ways in which we could make interconnection much more timely, and therefore help our Electric Power Authority colleagues to take away some of the burden. But also, we then have the other system, because now we can interconnect up to 5 mega, right? So, I don't know. Perhaps to explore would be if perhaps we'd have to have 2 tracks. One, just as PJ is saying, if a person certifies, if an engineer is going to certify, what does he or she need in terms of documents in order to take to the authorities, so that they say, look, this is duly certified. That needs to be explored, what those documents are to be. And then we also have to explore for larger systems like co-generators, what is the type of process that has to be explored. Perhaps I'd throw it out there, but I seem to see that we're talking a little bit about system certification, that there could be some that are over 25 that may be different. Yeah? Over here? Yeah, by all means. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Maeso. I'm the manager for the microgrid system for Crowley, which is the LG Natural Gas Division, and I'm a past public policy, energy policy lead here in Puerto Rico. First, I'd like to congratulate the Bureau for this. Honestly, I love the fact that stakeholders from everywhere are here. And I think there should be more citizens too. Only one of them was speaking. Perhaps we should make an effort for further participation from individuals in order to continue to learn from each other. And just as I was saying, to explain energy cannot be done with an interview with Ruben Sanchez in 5 minutes. Ruben Sanchez is a local broadcaster, radio mostly, also TV. So for all of us to understand the subject. And just as a comment, and tying into some of the things that Javier Rua was saying regarding feeders and data and all of that, and with that graph on screen, Javier made a comment earlier regarding the experience of Sunrun in New England. And I have always tried to share the message. I do so because I put myself in the mindset of what we want, to facilitate the Bureau's work, right? That's what we want to do. That the Bureau have tools, and that many of the things be seen not as limitations, but rather as incentives for projects or bills to be approved. Because when I was in the government, I was so sad whenever we had projects for, in one case, the free market zone, where 10 megawatts or 12 megawatts could be installed on the roof in one area in the metropolitan area that has a lot of demand. And I never understood why we couldn't achieve that, which was so good for everyone, basically. It was good for Puerto Rico. It was good for the government agency. It was good for clean energy, renewable energy, and in an area where they greatly needed it, where there's high demand. So what I think, and where I'd like to take my message before the Bureau, as that we look at these things not from the point of view that I don't want to use the feeder information to limit, but rather to create incentives. Where can I truly begin to put in more in renewable energy where it's needed and where it actually helps the Electric Power Authority? And they know that I'm one of the defenders of all of them. Almost all of them are friends of mine, these guys over here. Don't worry, we're gonna separate them this afternoon. Oh, good. Well, good, because I don't need all of them. I'm not trying to say that they're not all my friends. I just don't know them all. To my left, we have an SKP here too. Well, nothing. Hopefully, we put our minds together as to how to create incentives for these things to actually work, and not look at these things as limitations. That you can't do this, you can't do that. Okay, so what can we do, and what things can we do? I know there's thousands of things that we can do that help everyone. They help the grid, they help our customers, and in addition, I want to also make a comment of something that happened earlier today, which is to somewhat clarify industrial consumption, which was said isn't important. I'd like to differ from that. Industrial consumption is not 50%. I looked at the number, it's about 12, 13% industrial consumption in terms of, but the effect of the economy is 50% of our economy, you see? So let's not leave a sector out because it doesn't matter, what have you, because 50% of the income in Puerto Rico is in the industrial sector, GDP. Just a comment, right? Because my job for many years has been with that sector. Well, that's it so far. Thank you. Thank you, Jose. Let me expound a bit on what you're saying. And we have someone who knows about pharmaceuticals here. So the energy that you're consuming from the Electric Power Authority reflects what is now being produced on site, because perhaps we have a pharmaceutical company that is generating, and what's pending comes from the Electric Power Authority. So there will be less consumption from the grid now that you're producing on site. If you could tell us a bit more. Well, currently at the plant I represent, we're considering 2 energy sources, cogeneration as well as photovoltaic. What we're looking for, and the bottom line, what the industry is looking, is to lower operational costs and be more competitive. Currently, we may have X company CFO saying, where is it most cost effective to make our pharmaceutical products? They consider Singapore, Ireland, Brazil, don't forget India, and Puerto Rico as well. And when they do the adding and subtraction, in addition to personnel's capacities and what are the resources we have in our territory, but they're also looking to lower their operational costs. Even more, when we lost the incentives under Act 936, start from that. Now, if the industry leaves, everything related to industry leaves too. So what we're looking for is to lower costs. In my personal case, what I'm doing is identifying how to lower energy consumption at the plant, how to be more competitive, how to be more efficient with equipment. And also what we're looking for to a great degree, so that the impact be even greater by lowering our expense, is what we're paying currently to the Electric Power Authority, which is, let's say, we're close to what, 19, almost 20 cents per kilowatt hour, without considering that in July, there's going to be an additional cent increase, and the next future years that we know will be scaled. And we need to fight against that. And in this sense, what we're looking for is to reduce operational costs, which in fact, the cogeneration project has its main driver, not business continuity, it's reducing costs. That was prior to Maria. That was August 2017. Post Maria, we're like, wait a minute, it's not just about reducing costs. Oh my God, it's business continuity operation, regardless of what may happen beyond the plant's jurisdiction. So that's what we're looking to do. Lower our demand, lower our consumption, but at the same time, reduce our operational costs, looking for how we can be more competitive. And to the degree, we're also looking for export, energy export or different services. No, simply, it's not about exporting energy. It's to uphold our contract with the Electric Power Authority to remain clients of the authority, because obviously we cannot depend solely of an isolated cogeneration. We cannot run that island-wide, because obviously systems need maintenance. As we mentioned, we need business continuity. So the intention is not to export. I don't know of any other industry of this magnitude that is currently considering energy export through net metering, but we do uphold is a percentage as being considered to keep a percentage from the Electric Power Authority in the case that the authority, for whatever reason, for maybe climatic conditions we lose, we can still uphold our operational conditions without sacrificing manufacturing as such and our goals. Yeah. That's important, certainly, the characteristics that are being seen in the system in terms of cogeneration. Now, with regards to service, let's go back to Javier. If you'd be kind enough to, in your systems, are you saying that your systems are small and perhaps don't require such a large scope study? Because if it's 6 kilowatts, it should be a more agile process as compared to connecting cogeneration. Now, the equipment that you've already seen that are already available out in the market, are you already looking as to whether these equipment provide ancillary services like distribution level compensation? Are you already offering these services? Have you talked with the Electric Power Authority regarding these services? Can you tell us a bit about ancillary services? In Puerto Rico, Javier Rua for the record, by the way, Sunrun services are basically residential, house by house, via local partners, NEMAR, New Energy. But in other markets, particularly New England, and also the city of Los Angeles, our grid services division at Sunrun is entering into serious conversations with utilities who end up being PPAs, which is Spanish for public-private partnership. In order to offer services on demand to the utility, there's a system operator between the authority and all those roofs. And in New England, when they need X amount of megawatts at X hour, peak time, then that message comes in, and Sunrun then acts as a dispatch unit for the utility. They did it for the first time? No, not the first time. In New England already won the bid for capacity, because this is going to begin in a year and a half. They just won the capacity bid. They were awarded the ISO in New England, the independent operator. Let's say the authority needs 10 megawatts, and they competed, natural gas, and Sunrun already had 5,000 roofs of our regular clients in various states who feed into the ISO. So those 5,000 roofs were already there with batteries that only operate once in a while. Now, those batteries are monetized much further because customers are able to achieve income by granting access to the batteries. And then the utility benefits because it has clean capacity in which it really didn't have to invest in, and that creates benefits for all. So, and it has to do with all of these capacities that you mentioned in communications between equipment. Now, in the executive order, for the first time, even though it's no longer in effect, the problem with the way in which it's stated therein, it seems to be a regulatory command and control that have to go to your battery, when normally this happens bilaterally, negotiated, where everyone benefits. Because if you go into my battery, then you pay me. And there's a series of agreements that have to occur in both directions. But in technological terms, that the distributed systems, 2.0, 3.0, is how these capacities are added in order to provide diverse services, not only energy, but also balance and that type of stuff, of thing. Well, it's also important to expand a bit, because even though it may not be tomorrow, these services are already available. And when we plan not to inhibit ourselves to make decisions now that later will hamper access to those services. He mentions ISO, New England's ISO, then there's PJM in Washington, and I will present Puerto Rico's ISO, which is obviously PREPA. Currently, they are performing different duties or functions that in other places, different institutions do. Quick question, then we'll go back. With regards to aggregation, right now we want to add services, which could be services that are behind the meter, and add them in order to put them into the bulk system. There's a process in order to make that kind of scheme possible. Has it been thought? Should we explore how something as such could be maybe distilled? Yes, good morning. My name is Gary Soto, and currently I'm the Chief of Operations of the Electric Power Authority. Yeah, I'm the ISO chief. Yes, exactly. So possibly, as you mentioned, Camacho, not necessarily everything that happens at the Electric Power Authority is something I agree with as an individual, right? Yeah, following the rules, very good, very good. Following those lines. The Electric Power Authority so far has presented a transformation process currently. That's the moment, the period we're in. And we also have to talk about Maria, the hurricane, because it destroyed us totally, completely. Over 90% of our system, of our grid. So what happens? All that has been discussed so far looks great, sounds good. But there are colleagues which have mentioned our system is at a juncture that something as simple as being able to manage all these small GD systems with a very swift injection and to be too quick could give us a problem with stability. And I, as a system, don't have control to manage that change because we're working with a system that needs transformation. The Electric Power Authority worked on an IRP, not this one, 2015. And a solar system implementation study has already been done. And all these regulation studies or presentations establish that there needs to be a transformation of our generations fleet in order to be able to manage a solar systems injection. As part of the authority, we're underway a very exhausting and complicated process, even though I'm currently in a leadership position. All us colleagues that are here, we're just Indians. What we do is execute and operate our systems under the circumstances that we're told and have. So that means, as mentioned, we're working with a pretty complicated system for what we're trying to achieve, which is to move into the future and to be able to have aggregate systems, as mentioned, which I've heard on so many occasions, and I've had the opportunity to participate in many presentations, and everything sounds great. The problem is how does this affect our current system and operationally? From my point of view, I don't see that currently, June 7th, 2019, to be viable. We need to move in that direction. The utility is already making efforts to achieve movement towards viable change, to be more efficient, to be more flexible, which is what we need in our system in order to be able to work with these systems. And simply stated, many people know our operations curve is standard during the day. We have a peak at midday, and at night is when we have the highest demand. Therefore, all of these systems basically are being used during the day. For you to have a vision as to my own vantage as an operator, this means that I have to have flexible and rapid use machines. If I'm talking about 2,000 megawatts injection, what the IRP states, which is my baseline, it states that what I do, I can go solar full all day. The systems that are being proposed at a large scale. What do we do at night? right? And with the system that we have, those who know our machinery know that I can't take 400 megawatts equipment that's fuel based. I can't turn it on and off like it was some kind of home based generator. For the record, Reynaldo Varedi, Electric Power Authority. So expounding a bit about what Engineer Gary Soto is commenting, and part of which Council Pareja spoke earlier about the limitations that we have in the system currently at the grid and PREPA. For you to have an idea, for example, as to the certain obsoleteness of the electric power authority system. Well, many of this dispatchable energy concepts are related to system automation, particularly when we talk about small systems, distribution feeders, for example. For you to get an idea, right now, the electric power authority has about 1,400 distribution feeders. Well, forgive me to be redundant, distributed throughout the substations. At least, not even 1 or 2% of these feeders have been automated beyond, the breaker. And when I say automation, we mean remotely operated connection, perhaps 20 or 30 feeders, as if that, throughout the grid. And maybe functioning even less, perhaps. But let's say that at one point that would have been the optimal 1 or 2%. Now the rest, beyond the breaker at the substation, they have no automation to speak of whatsoever. All of the connections between one line and the other, and all the operations have to be done manually in the field. In terms of system protection, for example, the relevators, I believe that the percentage of those which are still electromechanical, I think goes to 80 plus, maybe 90% of the re-elevators. So if we look at it from the other point of view, no more than 10% are digital and have all the features that you could call modern, that you would expect from a current utility. Obviously, that imposes some limitations in operations and integration of all these systems. If it is true that, just as Engineer Soto indicated, there are certain expectations or intent to make improvements, well, there are certain fiscal limitations, obviously, at the current electric power authorities as we know it. Everyone knows that 3 years ago, we've been under Title III, or bankruptcy, if you want to call it. And indeed, it is true that post-Maria, there's been expectations to make certain improvements using federal funds that have been destined by 428, what you call mitigation. But in the same way, we say that still hasn't happened. It's been a year, 9 months from the hurricane. I don't know if the legislation signed off by the president yesterday, whatever includes funds for that. Honestly, I don't know. But I think that they're in a separate fund, And the truth is that we do depend upon a capital injection that we currently don't have available to maybe help temper the electric power authority, or at least try to modernize it in such a way that we're able to be more responsive to these needs to integrate these sources. Well, just as a side note, and to add to what Engineer Soto and what Council Pareja said, we have to also fine-tune our expectations that we have to the realities of our grid. Not because the inverters or systems provide certain faculties or do have certain capacities available, does it mean that can we truly take full advantage of them given the grid as it is. So that description of how the system is currently is invaluable. Thank you so much. That's precisely what I wanted to talk about. That ancillary services that we've been discussing sound great. We do need to move in that direction, but I do find that it's not fair to the consumer to acquire equipment that has those capacities and that it be told by regulation they have to have the net metering and the connection control capacities if the electric power company doesn't offer the opportunity to take advantage of the ancillary services. The issue is that it shouldn't become an obligation, but rather an incentive to be connected, and that when that occurs, then the person could acquire the equipment, because why would I make a customer have to acquire equipment that has a 5-year warranty or something, and then the ancillary services enter into effect at the 6th or 10th year when that equipment is no longer serviceable. It's obsolete. Totally agree that it shouldn't be an imposition to opt for this type of thing, so that X or Y equipment to be legal in Puerto Rico, it has to have X, Y capacity, for the fact that on the market that they have it. Normally they have it. And if it's possible in a certain market, and if it's not possible in the market, it's not used. But in the case of New England, it was already there, and it had been thought of in contracting, and since that was possible, then it would be viable in the future. But it shouldn't be. We will not activate a GT if it doesn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is a little bit of what the interpretation that may have been given to the executive order now. And the command and control, that system has to communicate because they have to, or if not, it's no. Well, so is to keep this line of thought, and whenever it becomes possible, then we can achieve it. Definitely, yeah. Yes. Another aspect, hi, Carlos Pares, following our colleagues' statements, there's also another aspect regarding standards, what have you, but there's also commercial aspects that sometimes are not thought about in regulation, because in the praxis, you may have an opportune, a timely arrived evaluation letter, or a time frame at a region that takes 6 months in one region and a different one in 15 days. But then the commercial aspects and the technical, call them administrative perhaps, issues like changing the meter could then now, be done by a colleague that is waiting for net metering. So also the financing, that last step, isn't paid with the net metering accreditation. If it takes 8 months, then you are there 8 months without receiving your financing, which is hard for the economy and for the thousands of jobs that also depend on this, not necessarily transmission or distribution either, but rather how this component that you could call the Electric Power Authority, and what the new law describes as the contractor. The certifier, do you mean? No, the private entity. The operator. Oh, yeah. How within these regulations and standards, they could also be more streamlined communications with a better flow chart, so that everything could flow more smoothly, would be great, because that other administrative function is important in order to comply with all the achievements. Yeah. So what's the challenge then? To be very well, what's the challenge? You want requisites well specified? No, my opinion, this is theoretical now. There cannot be requisites that become a straitjacket. Tomorrow they change the batteries, the next day they change the other. How often are regulations revised? It can't be so, for any of the parts, it can't be. Regulations have to be dynamic. That's why we use current codes, etc. But such as Regulation 89 that state that current standards have to be used as applicable. But in synthesis, let's see, with a frame, because I remember that we met with the Electric Power Authority. There was an action plan that was made, and it worked super good. No one had to come to the commission or now the Bureau to discuss any of that. And congrats to everyone, PJ, Mark. But indeed, that streamlining within our channels of communication within regulations, because under 8915, there was a dislocation between the certification and arrival. What about the next stage? Adding to what he's saying, I believe that the difference would be in the system's magnitude, because, for example, something that's happening currently, I'm a licensed and certified electrician, and I'm working on a system that they want behind a transfer switch. What the customer wants is not have to deal with fuel whenever the lights are gone. They want a system behind the transfer. And that could be a 5 or 10 kilowatt system, just by way of examples, as Rua was saying, that in many cases are small systems. And the requisite could be more simple and more malleable, that could be modified from something that is more simple that you're installing. Now, if you were to install a system such as what the engineer was talking about, cogeneration, or who knows, 1, 2, 3 megs, then that kind of process would probably be more complex. Certainly, it could entail other things. But for the systems that are being installed, and I say it by experience as an installer, there's many things that people put a system up with the inverter with its own transfer switch, and that first the photovoltaic system exhausts every bit before it goes back to the. So you're talking about that last, but I'm talking about the last stage, the net metering. How much does it take for the electric power authority to change the meter? Because it can't be done by an electrician. No, I agree. That the meter, because of the coding and the invoicing, is complex, yes, or the billing rather. Well, yeah, the thing is, when we become ready for net metering, remember currently, this workshop is about technical affairs and standards for interconnection cabling. Our understanding is that net metering is something that needs to be considered, but the bulk currently is the technical aspects. But we do have the challenge noted, yeah. Well, something that I'd also like to quickly mention, as already mentioned, that when you're talking about the operator instead of the electric power authority, understand, given the changes that are coming, that these interconnection regulations go beyond customer interaction with the electric power authority. Remember that there will also be perhaps another operator, or there may be some energy co-ops, which are smaller utilities that will also have interconnection, and with the microgrids too. So we have to be more ample-minded there. Yeah. In terms of the commercial aspects, as our colleague was saying, that's my area, the commercial electric power authority division. Post the hurricane, like our other colleagues have said, the electric power authority obviously suffered an impact that we're still working on. And just as they're talking over here, also the economic aspects of things. So currently, and the authority's reality right now is that we don't have the availability of enough meters to establish that have 10, 1,000 to install tomorrow. The meter purchases are being quite slow because of the lack of cash flow to be able to purchase. And the person who supplies the meters, I can't tell them I need 10,000 tomorrow. They have to manufacture them, and then we can get them. Right now, we received about 10,000, but we're talking about, we asked after, these were ordered after Maria, a year and 9 months, and I run the Mayagüez region. We alone in our region, we have over 25,000 down, okay, broken, without the GD. So nothing. It's that the hurricane took them out. Island-wide, we've got over 100,000 that need changing, and additionally, the demand from GDs, we are giving priority to install meters for GD above the broken ones, the ones that are down, to establish to fulfill the need and to comply with the law. And I've been asked to work with the viabilization of completed projects via the portal to verify that all those meters have been installed and that the correct tariff has been applied. Every day we monitor the portal, and now with the new process until the new process is acclimated pursuant to Act 17, we're also working the system manually via the plan engineers who also provide changes and the right tariffs as quickly as possible for purposes of companies. Well, thank you for sharing, because everyone can say, I want this, I want that, but this is the reality. And thank you so much for sharing that. Allow me to share the following. We're talking about interconnection, right? And there may be interconnection limitations because we already have the feeders that are saturated because of different reasons. In rice and beans, our operations person here, perhaps we could increase interconnection capacity if we have pickers that are more agile. That way we can increment. Perhaps if we increase, perhaps if we do feeder conversions to 13.2 kilovolts, we increase how many people can interconnect. So I am very sure, and now I'm speaking, I'm very sure that we can create a narrative for people to understand that these repairs have to be done at the utilities in order to be able to achieve resilience as necessary, and that this money that's coming is so that when the next climate event happens, we're not where we're at. So we could include in a narrative that X, Y, Z has to be done in terms of the upgrades and repairs to the utility in order to interconnect more distributed energy that will add the resiliency we need and that everyone is looking for. And just to close, we're already arriving at midday. It's midday. So the comments that we now have, please brief so we can go to lunch, and then we'll be out for now. Quickly and soon enjoy your meals. Now, with regards to Act 17, which established a solution to change the onus of cost in terms of feeders to the private sector, I ask, knowing the reality as to the lack of net metering meters at the authority, as also the timeliness or lack thereof for the acquisition of the meters, a solution, and I ask, could also be that each company also have its cache of net meters, installs them, and then donates them to the Electric Power Authority. What we can't do is just stay in the discussion of a problem if there may be possible non-technical, low-hanging fruit solution. Perfect. Those are what we'll be discussing this afternoon. Indeed, the solutions, please, over here. Sir? Following the comment, it would be good that the Electric Power Authority report what's happening because they lack meters and they leave me in blank. But because I stand in front of the meter every day and it says error, 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 and I continue to use solar power, I don't know. You have to tell people so that people, can get mad at other people. I think that the challenge is better lines of communication. Would anyone else have a quick comment before we go to lunch? Look, sincerely, thank you so much. This couldn't. Oh, one more person. One second. Yeah. With regards to your particular case, I'm going to ask you to please give me your information, and I will be sure that we change your meter in the next few days. Oh, there's progress. Good. This cannot happen without you guys. The amount of information that you've shared has been excellent. We're going to go lunch. We're going to. What time will we be back? 1 second, please. Okay, we'll be back at 1:15, but it's military time, okay? 1:15, wouldn't that be 13:15? Enjoy your lunch.
Sí,